Tragedies on America's racetracks.
This has been an incredibly difficult year in horse racing.
Why some believe horses are being pushed too hard before they ever compete.
The fastest times, those are going to be your most expensive horses.
Million wide.
We explore a critical gap in oversight. Horses too young to race, but old enough to be sold for millions.
A million, 100,000.
Primary dispatch.
66-year-old male, not breathing well.
An ambulance emergency.
The older the ambulance gets, the more small problems it creates.
How a shortage of new ambulances
You know you need to go to the hospital, right?
is forcing many communities to rely on old ones.
That may mean that the ambulance may not start when it's dispatched to a call.
Why critical parts needed to build more of them may not be a priority for U.S. automakers. And the Midwestern village of Bratenahl.
Everyone knows that Bratenahl will pull you over.
Controversial ticketing practices disproportionately impacting black drivers.
The sunlight is what it is. Everybody picks up speed in the sunlight.
How our joint investigation with the Marshall Project helped change how police in this town work.
Something needs to be said to the people because it's not fair.
I'm Katie Beck in Washington. Welcome to this edition of Scripps News Investigates. American horse racing has seen a year of high-profile deaths among thoroughbreds, suffering catastrophic injuries. These deaths have been especially puzzling since the industry has taken steps in recent years to enhance safety. But a months-long investigation by Scripps News has discovered an area of vulnerability with young horses, those too young to race, but old enough to be sold for millions. National investigative correspondent Patrick Terpstra found during that early part of a horse's career, the organizations tasked with keeping racehorses safe are for the most part absent.
When the starting bell sounded at last year's Kentucky Derby, the most famous horse race in America had already been overshadowed by the tragic news that 7 thoroughbreds had died in the days leading up to the event.
Maple Leaf Melt!
About 3 months later, at this race in New York, crowds watch as the horse in the lead goes down just a few feet from the finish line. The jockey's okay, but the horse suffers a catastrophic injury to her leg and is later euthanized. There's no single explanation for why these tragedies occurred, but with high-profile horse fatalities at tracks across the country, we wanted to understand more about how this industry is keeping horses safe.
This has been an incredibly difficult year in horse racing.
The top voice in the nation when it comes to the welfare of these horses is the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, known as HISA. Lisa Lazarus is its CEO.
You are taking this as an opportunity to really take a closer look at the safety of horses?
Yes, I mean, that's obviously our mission. Horse racing has made a really significant impact on the number of equine fatalities annually. But certainly it's been way too many, and it's something that we really need to improve as an industry.
That improvement may need to begin with a hard look at how the industry protects racehorses before they are old enough to compete. Our investigation found the beginning of a horse's career to be a vulnerable time. It's when oversight is at its weakest and millions of dollars are on the line.
Million wide.
The journey for many young horses to the racetrack begins at public auctions like this one in Saratoga Springs, New York. Most of the horses here are around 1 year old, at least a year away from racing and too young to fall under HISA's protections.
What are we seeing here?
We're seeing the buyers who are looking at the horses trying to decide what they think about each physical type.
Natalie Voss has been attending these auctions for years. She's the editor-in-chief of the Pollock Report, one of the country's leading independent horse racing publications.
They are looking at these horses trying to find the next possibly Kentucky Derby winner.
That's the goal for a lot of people. They could be worth millions of dollars when they go under the hammer tonight.
On the night we were there, horse number 165 sells for a staggering $4 million. But as these horses get a little older, the physical demands on them increase. This video comes from an auction of 2-year-olds last May where sellers can drive up the prices with demonstrations of speed called breezes.
The fastest times, those are going to be your most expensive horses.
For most, the goal in these breezes is to run an 1/8 of a mile in 10 seconds or less.
Way faster than they will in their fastest race of their lives.
Is there a problem with the horse sprinting for 10 seconds at a 2-year-old sale?
The prep process for that is what people tend to worry about. We know from the science on bone and skeletal development that you do need to get high-speed work into a horse if that's what their job is going to be. I and a lot of other people wonder how many did not hold up to the preparatory process and had some sort of injury.
Stress injuries that go unnoticed can turn deadly later in the horse's career. A review of the deaths at the home of the Kentucky Derby last spring did not examine the early part of those horses' lives, but pointed out frequent high-intensity exercise that does not allow for recovery predisposes horses to catastrophic injuries. And at horse auctions, fatal injuries can happen. Scripps News obtained this video from PETA showing a 2-year-old horse getting hurt while taking part in one of those breezes in Maryland in 2021. As the scene plays out, it becomes clear this horse suffered a devastating injury. The sales company that organized the sprint told Scripps News she was humanely euthanized, but did not provide further detail about the cause of her breakdown.
Do you have a need to see speed on a young horse before you buy that horse?
I have a need to see stride, determination.
Veteran trainer Gary Contessa has racked up more than $85 million in career winnings and ran a horse in the Kentucky Derby. He told us he's seen dramatic safety improvements in the racing industry in recent years.
This business, from the day that I came to it to now, was like the Wild West. And now it's almost like it's finally come under the law and order. You know what I mean?
But he said that same law and order has not yet extended to the sale of horses that are too young to race but old enough to be sold for millions.
All these different layers of protection would be a good thing at the 2-year-old sales to protect you from the bad guys who are out there. I don't think there's a lot of them, but I think there are some.
Do you think that these 2-year-old sales need to be looked at, maybe regulated more than they are?
I would love to see at the 2-year-old sales no medication, period, because right now they can run on a lot of medication that we can't run on at the track.
Medications can make horses run faster, but can also mask injuries and put them at greater risk of getting hurt. Nationwide data we analyze from horse safety advocates show over 500 thoroughbred racehorse deaths linked to training or racing in 2023. But those numbers may not give the full picture. That's because states do not require owners to report deaths or injuries of young horses, and neither does the nation's top horse racing authority.
It seems like it's sort of a black box, the treatment of these horses before they get to race age.
I don't know if it's a sort of a black box per se, but we at HISA don't have insight into that process.
We found some of the biggest forces in horse racing, including Churchill Downs, home of the Kentucky Derby, have encouraged HISA to extend its rules to cover 2-year-old sales. In this June 2022 letter we obtained, written to Lazarus, they write, "To protect racehorses, it's imperative that all workouts are regulated." And they said those short breezes at extremely high speed have the potential to compromise horse welfare.
The 2-year-old sales, I think there is some credence to the argument that we could take authority over those sales. And that is probably the direction we will go in if we aren't able to have cooperation from the sales companies.
One of the largest thoroughbred sales companies in the country is Fasig-Tipton. It's the one that held the auction in Maryland where the horse broke down during a sprint. Last fall, the company told us it is not a governing body for the breed, but it has rules in place to protect the buyer, seller, and the horse. That includes random drug testing of horses that take part in breezes. Gary Contessa says most trainers do what's right by these horses, but that stricter rules to protect them will only make this sport safer.
We need to have as much safety-minded rules as possible. Let's face it, you got a 1,200-pound horse. The bone in his leg is not that much bigger than the bone in your leg. We're never going to end the catastrophic breakdowns. But boy, we can knock that number down to almost nothing.
For the racetracks, also for the sales, for the entire industry.
We can do it for the entire industry.
Last fall, Scripps News pressed the head of HISA about the lack of oversight of 2-year-old sales. She told us she was starting talks with the 3 major auction houses, Fasig-Tipton, Ocala Breeder Sales, and Keeneland, to ask them to voluntarily align their own anti-doping rules with HISA's. As a result of those discussions, the auction houses now say they will be implementing stricter rules to strengthen horse safety this summer. Keeneland told us they ended breezes altogether. Imagine needing an ambulance and being told there isn't one available, or that the one coming to you broke down and won't make it. In many cities and towns across America, that's the reality. It's because there's a shortage of ambulances nationwide, and we found it can take as long as 4 years to get a new one. In the meantime, emergency workers are having to rely on old ones, some with hundreds of thousands of miles on them. Here's Scripps News reporter Chris Conti.
66-year-old male, not breathing well.
2 decades as an EMT in Orange County, North Carolina.
You know you need to go to the hospital, right?
Covering an area the size of Los Angeles.
All right, let's roll.
Stephanie Gilmore and her crews are logging hundreds of miles on their ambulances each day.
All right, buddy, let us help you, okay?
Lately, though, they've been sounding their own kind of alarm about aging, often unreliable ambulances.
The older the ambulance gets, the more small problems it creates.
Orange County has 16 ambulances. Half are in need of replacement. They're breaking down more often. Meeting crews are spending hours each month transferring their equipment from one vehicle to the next.
Higher mileage, the older the vehicle, the more times they have to go in for routine maintenance, and our crews take the trucks to the shop to do routine maintenance. It takes about an hour to switch from one truck to the other.
Wow. So you're using ambulances right now that you really don't want to be
Absolutely.
using?
Yeah, we have 2 of those in our fleet right now that we have them as reserves, last resort type of situations.
As the Director of Emergency Services for Orange County, Kirby Saunders has the money he needs to buy new ambulances. But like cities and towns across the country, he's been told it could be 2 years before a new ambulance hits the road here.
So just like you and I, we may outgrow our vehicles over a period of 5 or 10 years. Specifically, how that impacts EMS, that leads to reduced reliability.
When you have reduced reliability as a EMS driver, what does that translate to?
That may mean that the ambulance may not start when it's dispatched to a call.
The root cause of the problem has to do with truck chassis, essentially the skeletal frame ambulances are constructed on top of. A nearly year-long Scripps News investigation has discovered a severe shortage in ambulance chassis is leaving communities nationwide like Orange County waiting years for these vital first response vehicles. We first told you last year about how when the pandemic started, automakers like Ford and GM started using those chassis and other components for vehicles like pickup trucks, which is more lucrative, instead of prioritizing giving those chassis to companies that build ambulances.
I think there could have been certainly much greater support from a federal government level to ensure the prioritization of critical public safety resources in the community.
150 Franklin Street.
As ambulance manufacturers continue to wait on automakers for the parts they need, the shortage of ambulances only continues to get more dire for American communities. Our Scripps News investigation pulled numbers from the National Emergency Medical Services Information System, a DOT database containing details of nearly every ambulance activation in the United States. We found that in 2021, there were a reported 13,540 mechanical failures that prevented ambulances from responding. In 2022, that number was 14,905, a nearly 10% increase. Scripps News and our Scripps News stations across the country have also discovered some ambulances are on the road with 400,000, 500,000, even 672,000 miles on them.
Is there any scenario where this starts to become, a life or death situation for some municipalities, some counties?
Oh, certainly, I can see that.
Kirby Saunders currently has 8 ambulances with more than 150,000 miles on them. In June, that number will be 10, or 66% of this county's fleet. Increased breakdowns and maintenance repairs aren't just impacting patient safety.
I have no doubts that it decreases morale and confidence.
All of it has left EMTs like Stephanie Gilmore wondering if the ambulance she needs will work.
281 en route 1246.
The next call comes in.
EMS 11's on scene staging.
If you were able to just replace every ambulance that needs to be replaced right now.
That would be incredible.
If you're black and behind the wheel, you're at risk of being pulled over. That's what locals have been saying for years when they travel through Bratenahl, an old wealthy village near the city of Cleveland, Ohio. Our investigative team there has been reporting on this story for more than a year in partnership with the Marshall Project. And what they've uncovered has changed how police in that town work. Here's Scripps News Cleveland investigative reporter Tara Morgan.
Bratenahl is a wealthy lakefront village in Cleveland, Ohio, dotted with mansions and waterfront estates. About 3 out of 4 people here are white. It's flanked on 3 sides by predominantly black communities, many of whose residents have come to see Bratenahl the same way.
Everyone knows that Bratenahl will pull you over.
That reputation is so strong, some drivers try to avoid passing through the village altogether. But the interstate connecting Cleveland's eastern and western suburbs runs along Bratenahl's southern edge and is hard to avoid.
I pulled you over because it's saying that the registered owner is suspended.
When you walk into Bratenahl's mayor's court, which hears cases about traffic violations, you'll find a lot of people fighting their tickets.
So when you got pulled over, you were surprised?
Yes, it's frustrating, definitely taking the time out to have to come to court.
And most people are black. Kevin Conwell is a Cleveland councilman.
They know who they're stopping. I mean, you go in the courtroom, you go there and looking for justice. You go in the courtroom, you see just us.
Scripps News partnered with the Marshall Project in Cleveland, a nonpartisan organization covering the criminal justice system, to better understand what's happening in Bratenahl and to dig deeper into their traffic stop data. Our joint investigation revealed that Bratenahl has assessed more than $700,000 in fines, court costs, and other revenue since 2020. And most of the tickets, an estimated 60% or more, went to black drivers. We also found that race wasn't listed on about half the tickets we reviewed.
Something needs to be said to the people because it's not fair.
Bratenahl's longtime former mayor, John LaCastro, strongly defended the police department when asked about its ticketing practices.
We have no idea who's driving the car, what color they are, nor do we care. But if they break the law, we pull them over. There is no intentional profiling.
In February 2023, just months after our original report aired, Bratenahl's police chief made a change, requiring his officers to record race on all future traffic stops. A year's worth of data since then has brought new insight. Police continue to ticket black drivers most frequently, but now a new mayor wants to do something about it, and we pressed him for answers.
So did you view this as targeting or profiling?
So we can't say yet. Is there a non-discriminatory explanation or justification for the disparity?
Mayor Keith Benjamin has an extensive background in diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the past, he helped develop a cultural competency program for police at Cleveland State University.
So what do you say to people who go into mayor's court, they look around and they see people of color?
That's a difficult situation, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Police Chief Charles Labello says his department is determined to be transparent with what they continue to learn about why black people are still being ticketed more than any other race in his town.
It'll be our job moving forward to figuring out exactly what those whys are, and if any of those whys can be corrected or should be corrected,
In the wake of our original report, it was also announced that Bratenahl officers will now go through bias-free training that's similar to the curriculum Mayor Benjamin helped create, and it's more robust than what's required by the state.
A lot of the training goes through understanding power, understanding what position a police officer is in when they approach the vehicle, understanding how the subject, someone who stopped in that vehicle, what they may be feeling and experiencing.
The police chief told us he knows the process of changing a reputation takes time, just as it took years of ticketing mostly black drivers to lose the trust of so many in this community.
That reputation was built decades upon decades upon decades of old school Bratenahl policing. We're committed to help reverse that reputation and build the trust within the community.
To see more of our Cleveland investigative team's reporting on this story, you can scan the QR code on the screen. I'm Katie Beck. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week for another edition of Scripps News Investigates.